It was supposed to be a feast of peace, a gathering of Kaidu's children to honor his memory and discuss the future. Lavish dishes were prepared. Mary's milk flowed freely, bards sang old songs of conquest. But beneath the celebration, betrayal simmered. Khutulun arrived wary but proud. Dressed in ceremonial armor, she bowed to no one. Her brothers smiled and raised their cups, pretending to toast her honor. But in the shadows of the yurt, blades waited. Hired assassins, disguised as servants, were ready to strike at the perfect moment. One moved too early. As Khutulun reached for her cup, a dagger flashed from behind, but she was faster. In a blur of motion, she ducked, grabbed the attacker's wrist, and slammed him onto the banquet table, splintering wood and sending food flying. Chaos exploded. Her brothers shouted. Her loyal guards drew swords. The feast turned into a bloodied brawl. In the end, Khutulun stood over 3 dead men and a hall full of silence. She said nothing, just stared at her brothers and walked out. From that moment, the message was clear. They couldn't kill her in combat or in council. But they still had one weapon left: time. Khutulun wasn't just any granddaughter of Genghis Khan. She was the favorite child of Kaidu, the powerful Khan who ruled much of Central Asia. And that fact alone sparked outrage. In a world where sons were everything, Kaidu chose his daughter to ride beside him into war. From a young age, Khutulun trained like a warrior. She learned to ride horses with deadly speed, shoot arrows from the saddle, and fight with a sword just as fiercely as any general. She wasn't kept in the palace to embroider or sing. She was out on the battlefield, and Kaidu noticed. He brought her to strategy councils. He listened when she spoke. And when rebellions rose or borders flared, Kaidu often rode into battle with Khutulun at his side, not his sons. The whispers began among the nobility. Why did he favor her? Some said she was blessed by the spirit of Genghis himself. Others whispered darker things. Envy brewed like storm clouds. The court didn't like a woman holding a man's power, especially not this much power. And when Kaidu hinted that she might one day rule his khanate, his sons and rivals began sharpening their blades. In silence, Ked the royal camp, forming a great circle on the frozen ground. In the center stood Khutulun, bare-armed, expression like stone, muscles coiled with fury. Across from her, Prince Abtaka, clad in fine silks that would soon be soaked with sweat and shame. This wasn't just a duel, it was war, reputation, vengeance. If he won, he'd marry her and seize her power. If she won, he'd be disgraced before every noble in the Khanate. They circled. She feinted left. He lunged. She sidestepped, gripped his waist, and slammed him into the dirt so hard the crowd gasped. Once, twice. A third time, his pride shattered along with his body. The crowd erupted, some in awe, others in horror. No prince had ever been defeated so brutally, and no woman had ever dared to do it. Under the eyes of so many powerful men, Khutulun stood over him, breathing steady, her voice cutting through the silence. Let every suitor know, I am not the prize, I am the test. But victory would not protect her forever. Victory came at a cost, and for Khutulun, that cost was isolation. Her enemies feared her brothers despised her, and even those who admired her kept their distance. She had wrestled princes, crushed rebellions, and stared down assassins. But in the quiet hours between battles, one truth echoed louder than war drums. She was alone. No man dared court her now, not out of disrespect, but out of fear. Fear of being outmatched. Fear of being forgotten next to her legend. Whispers followed her like shadows. Who could ever tame Khutulun? But she never wanted taming. What she wanted, what she could never have, was someone who saw her not as a threat, not as a trophy, but as an equal. Some say she wrote poems under moonlight. Others claim she wept only once, by her father's grave. Whether myth or truth, her pain was real. Not even the strongest warrior can fight loneliness forever. And still, she rode. Not for love, not for marriage, but for her name, for the history they tried to steal. The Mongol court tried to erase her. Chronicles barely mentioned her name. Official histories replaced her with men she had outshone. But out on the open steppe, where campfires crackled and horses rested, Khutulun's story refused to die. Bards sang of the princess who wrestled hundreds of men and never lost. Mothers told daughters of the warrior who rode like a storm and chose her own fate. Even as empires shifted and maps changed, her legend traveled farther than any army ever could. In some parts of Central Asia, she was remembered not just as a general, but as a goddess of strength. Wrestlers invoked her name for luck. Some said she haunted the steppes, still watching over warriors who fought with honor. Over time, her name blurred into myth. She was called Ay Yaruk, or Moonlight Beauty. In other stories, she became the inspiration for Turandot, the icy princess of an Italian opera, twisted and romanticized, far from the fierce woman she truly was. But under the layers of legend, her truth endures. Khutulun was never just a warrior or a princess. She was a revolution in armor. When Kaidu Khan fell into a fever, the balance of power shattered overnight. His commanders grew restless, his sons circled like vultures, and in the center of it all stood Khutulun, calm, armored, and watching. Her brothers wasted no time. Before Kaidu had even drawn his last breath, they began rallying supporters, promising land and titles to anyone who would back them. But Khutulun wasn't interested in bribes or schemes. She had loyalty. The soldiers who had fought beside her on the battlefield remembered her courage, her strategy, and her victories. Many were ready to follow her as their next leader. The problem? She was a woman. And no matter how strong or brilliant she was, tradition still ran deep through the veins of the Mongol court. A female Khan was unthinkable. Still, Khutulun didn't back down. She made her case boldly, not through words but action. She commanded the armies in her father's absence, repelled raids, and restored order where her brothers failed. But as Kaidu's final days neared, one question loomed across the empire. Would he name Khutulun as his heir? Khutulun never wore a crown. No throne bore her name. Her brothers ruled after Kaidu, weak men who squabbled and faded into history. But Khutulun, she became immortal. She broke the rules carved in blood and fire, refused to be married off like property, fought side by side with men and won. She dared to lead in a world where women were supposed to vanish behind curtains and veils. And though she never ruled the empire, she ruled something far more dangerous, the imagination of the people. In battle, she was a general. At court, a threat. In legend, a queen. Was she Genghis Khan's true heir? Maybe not by title, but by spirit, without question. Khutulun's life is a reminder that sometimes power isn't inherited. It's seized, match by match, battle by battle, moment by moment, until the world has no choice but to remember. Her story lives on because it was never meant to, and that is her final victory. Kaidu Khan's death struck the empire like thunder. The mighty warrior who had defied the great Khans and trusted his daughter with his armies was gone. And with his final breath, Khutulun's shield against the vultures vanished. Her brothers wasted no time. Within hours of the funeral rites, they convened their own council, without her. Though Kaidu had never named a clear successor, everyone knew who his heart had favored. But hearts don't rule empires. Politics do. Khutulun returned from her father's burial to find her authority slipping. Soldiers were being bribed, territories promised. Even old allies began to shift uneasily away. She was a woman alone now, surrounded by men hungry for power and blood. Still, she did not beg. She did not cry. She gathered her own warriors, loyal to her to the end, and prepared to fight not for a throne, but for her father's legacy. The steppe was no longer safe, and her brothers? They wanted more than her title. They wanted her silenced. Imagine challenging 100 men to wrestling matches, and every time one lost, he also lost a fortune in horses. Now imagine being a woman doing this in the 13th century. That's Khutulun, granddaughter of Genghis Khan, princess of the Mongol Empire, and one of the most fearsome warriors you've probably never heard of. While the Mongol men thundered into battle, Khutulun rode beside them, clad in armor, with a bow slung across her shoulder. She could outshoot, outride, and outwrestle nearly anyone. Her father, Kaidu Khan, ruled Central Asia and trusted her more than any son. She wasn't just a warrior, she was his military advisor. But Khutulun made one thing clear: she would only marry a man who could beat her in wrestling. That might sound romantic, until you realize she won over 10,000 horses from would-be husbands who lost. As whispers of her strength spread from the steppes to the palaces of Persia and China, many wondered, could a woman like her ever be accepted in a man's war council? Or worse, was she becoming too powerful for even her own family? They couldn't defeat Khutulun in war. They couldn't outwit her in council, so her enemies chose the deadliest weapon left: rumor. Whispers began to spread like wildfire through the Mongol camps. Khutulun, they said, was sleeping with her father. It was a lie so vile, so taboo, that even speaking it aloud could spark execution. And yet, it worked. People started to look at her differently. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably in her presence. The respect she had earned, battle by battle, began to crack under the weight of slander. The story wasn't random. It was carefully planted by her rivals to destroy her image of honor. If they couldn't beat her sword, they'd break her with shame. Kaidu was enraged. He publicly denied the rumors, standing by his daughter with fire in his voice. "She is my blood, my pride, my greatest warrior. Let no dog speak her name in dishonor." But even a Khan's roar couldn't silence every whisper. Khutulun didn't flinch. Instead, she did the unthinkable. She offered to marry, to end the scandal, on her own terms. But not just anyone. Her new suitor was a prince, a rival, and very possibly, a spy. The empire was crumbling. Kaidu's territories, once fierce and united under his banner, were splintering. Rivals seized cities, former allies betrayed oaths, and Khutulun, weary but unbroken, prepared for one last campaign to restore her father's legacy and hold the steppe together. She rallied what remained of her loyal forces, veterans who had followed her since her first battle, young warriors raised on tales of her strength. They rode not for gold or glory, but for Khutulun. Her brothers mocked her efforts. "Let her chase ghosts," they sneered. But as her banners rose again over the steppes, fear returned to their hearts. She struck hard and fast, retaking outposts, restoring order, and sending rivals fleeing. But the steppe had changed. Unity was dying. And in every victory, she tasted ashes. By now she knew the truth. This war could not be won with muscle alone. Her enemies were not just men with swords, but time itself, custom, tradition, the invisible chains around every woman born to power. Still, she refused to stop, even if it broke her. No one knows exactly how Khutulun died. Some say it was illness, sudden, swift, and cruel. Others whisper darker tales, poisoned wine, a blade in the dark, a betrayal from someone she once trusted. What is known is this: she died young, and her death shattered what remained of Kaidu's dream. There was no grand funeral recorded, no tomb that has ever been found. Her brothers offered no grand eulogy. The woman who had once stood beside a Khan, who commanded armies and defied centuries of tradition, was quietly erased from the official Mongol histories. But the people did not forget. Stories of her wrestling feats lived on in the songs of traveling bards. Nomads told tales of the warrior woman who never lost a match and never bowed to a man. Even Marco Polo, the famed Venetian traveler, wrote of her strength and unmatched skill in battle. And yet, the silence around her end speaks louder than the legends. Because when powerful women die, history often forgets them, unless someone fights to remember. Khutulun's rise was a threat, not to her enemies on the battlefield, but to her own blood. Her brothers watched in silence as she outshone them in war, wrestling, and politics. Each victory she claimed was one more step away from their rightful inheritance. They called her arrogant behind closed doors, a woman playing warrior, a daughter acting like a Khan, but in truth, they feared her. She had their father's trust, and worse, she had the love of the Mongol soldiers. When Khutulun rode into camp, warriors straightened their backs and saluted. She wasn't just admired, she was respected. Kaidu's sons began to whisper. One brother suggested their sister be married off to a powerful ally to get her out of the way. Another proposed she be accidentally left behind in battle, but Kaidu would hear none of it. He still believed she was destined for greatness. And yet Khutulun wasn't blind. She saw the looks, she heard the rumors. She knew what ambition did to brothers when inheritance was at stake. So when her father fell ill with fever, she prepared not just for mourning, but for war. While Khutulun defended her father's borders, her brothers gathered behind closed doors. Inside a candlelit yurt, thick with smoke and betrayal, a secret council formed. Its goal was simple: ensure no woman would ever sit on the Khan's throne. Noblemen, jealous generals, and distant cousins were all summoned. They shared meat, drank fermented mare's milk, and whispered plans. Khutulun, despite her victories, was dismissed as a threat to tradition. "A woman cannot command men," one spat. "She brings dishonor, not order," said another. They plotted to strip her of command, replace her with a male heir, and erase her influence once and for all. And worse, some wanted to tarnish her name before it was too late. But Khutulun's allies had ears in the council. That same night, a loyal scout slipped into her camp with a warning. "They're planning to break the oath to your father. They'll bury your name before he's even dead." Khutulun stared into the fire. This wasn't just a fight for a crown, it was a battle for legacy, for history itself. His name was Abtaka, a foreign prince with fine robes, a honeyed tongue, and eyes that hid too much. He came not with armies, but with flattery and gifts, silk, spices, and promises. To many, he seemed the perfect match. Marrying him would silence the rumors, heal alliances, and give Khutulun a powerful protector. But Khutulun saw through his charm. He was too smooth, too eager. He didn't want her heart, he wanted her throne. Still, she played the game. She let him court her. let the nobles gossip, let her enemies believe she was softening, all while she quietly tested him, asking about war, strategy, loyalty. He stumbled, he lied. And then, one night, a soldier caught him speaking with one of her brothers under the cover of darkness. It was a trap, a setup, a betrayal. Khutulun summoned him in front of the entire court. She said nothing at first, just circled him like a lioness. Then she flung his golden ring back at his feet. "You came here for power," she said coldly, "but you forgot one thing. I never lose." And with that, she did what no royal woman had done before. She challenged her suitor to wrestle her in front of the empire.